Welcome everyone to this Writing Center workshop. So I'm just going to be brief and then our presenter will take over. I want to encourage you working on your writing assignments as you're working on using MLA style or any other style such as APA or Chicago, to come to the Writing Center because we can help you with using those different styles and generally with your writing. So take advantage of that. The yellow sheet that are on the table has information about the Writing Center. I'm sure we're getting such a great echo effect. I guess it's not usually this close. Let's see. That helps. Okay. The yellow sheet, as I mentioned, has our hours, our contact information, answers to commonly asked questions about the Writing Center, and on the back side, it explains how to schedule an appointment. And it's more complicated on here than it actually is to do. So just know that at Saturday night, if you're sitting at home in your jammies, you can schedule an appointment online if you want to, or you can drop in and just see if a consultant in the Writing Center is available. The purple sheet, or lavender sheet, if you will, has our list of workshops. And you can see what's coming up next week. APA documentation. You may be taking a class that's using APA. And then after that, some other good ones coming up, such as choosing and using textual support. That's a really helpful workshop. And I'd encourage you to look through the list. There's some on the backside as well. And think about which workshops you might want to attend in the future. And toward the end of this workshop, we'll distribute comment cards in which you can write your instructor's name if you want an instructor notified that you are here. And for those of you who are collecting paw points, I don't quite understand the whole thing with paw points, but you can write down your ID number on the front of the card, and we'll make sure that those paw points get recorded. Okay. For people who are online, we have like about a dozen people online. So you want to keep whispering and paper shuffling to a minimum so they can all hear. And those folks will also get a survey link at the end of this workshop. All right. Without further ado, Professor Heather Love, who's generously volunteered to lead this workshop for us once again, please give her your complete attention, and note there will be a little activity that we'll be doing, so you want to be paying close attention and take good notes here, okay? We're just getting situated here at the tables. There we go.
Okay, I think we're all set.
Yep.
Well, welcome everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people here for the fabulous, wonderful, and amazing MLA Citation Workshop. Thank you for dedicating your, what day is it today? Wednesday evening to this. As Michelle mentioned, my name is Dr. Love, and I teach over in the English department. And my goals for this evening are to run us through a fairly interactive session where you're going to get to practice implementing the MLA documentation guidelines for both in-text citations and the works cited page that comes at the end of the essay that you're writing. So I'm hoping that everyone will leave here tonight really confident about incorporating and citing sources in MLA style, or at least confident in knowing where you would go to get the information to kind of verify what you're doing. Because the thing about MLA, just like APA and Chicago and any other citation style, is it's fairly straightforward, but it is also fairly detail-oriented, so there's a lot of little kind of nitpicky things to know about. But once you know the rules, it's fairly easy to implement them. So everyone should have with them right now access to a source text of some sort. So if you're online, I think Michelle had sent out a note, we should have some kind of text. It can be a book, it can be an academic journal article, it can be a newspaper article, it can be a tweet, any kind of text that you might cite in your writing. If you're here in person, I have circulated various different source texts around the table. So you should have 2 or 3 of those at each table that you can share around amongst you. So you should also have a copy of the worksheet handout. We'll be going through that. and some kind of writing implement so you can take notes and work through the activities. Okay, everybody in here good to go? Yes, fantastic. Okay, so this is just a little map of what we'll be covering tonight. First, I want to talk for a few minutes about, why citation is important, what some of the underlying principles are of MLA guidelines, and then we're going to talk about in-text citations, what they are, how you can use them, and then finally move to the works cited page, again, looking at what it is and how you can make one. So that's what's coming up as we go through the workshop this evening. Okay, so my first question then, and this is to kind of get the brainstorming juices flowing, is why is citation so important? I mean, your professors, I'm sure, talk about it all the time, so you need to cite your sources properly. So what's the big deal here? So what I want you to think about right now is the fact that every time when you put together a piece of writing that you draw from other sources, there are 3 different kind of players in the mix, like I've got up on the slide here. You are the writer. There is your reader, whether this is just your professor, some of your classmates, or if you're going to go on and publish what you're writing, perhaps a much wider audience. There's lots of range for that. And then there are the sources that you're citing. So the people who came up with the ideas that you borrow and bring into your own writing. Okay, that's more focused. Awesome. Here's one more text if you want to circulate that to a table, Michelle. Sorry for folks online, we have an influx of newcomers. Okay, so the sources that you're citing are the kind of third element in our group of 3 here. And citation, I will make the claim here, is important for all of these 3 different groups of people or people. So I want you to take here just 1 minute. At the top of your handout, you'll see there's room to brainstorm here, responses to this question. So what can you jot down about why you think citation would be important to each of these 3 people? Get something down on the page for each. Coming momentarily. You will have. Oh, there you go. It's okay. So consider this your 30-second warning. Okay, so what is, I'm gonna point at tables, and I need someone from each table to be brave and speak up. So why is citation important to you, the author, starting at our table over in the far corner? One reason. We want to be credible. You want to be credible, great. So citing sources increases your credibility. Fantastic. How about our second table here? Why is it important to you? Any other reasons?
Necessary.
Why is it necessary?
Give credit to the authors.
Okay, so thinking to give credit to the people that you've drawn stuff from. Yeah, absolutely. And that sort of is important to you and to your sources. So your sources get credit for what it is that you're taking from them. Great. Another idea from this table, something we have not yet mentioned. Yeah.
It makes our work organized.
So it helps with organization so that we can see where things come from. Fantastic. To your readers, why is it important to your readers?
They can trust your credibility and refer to sources.
Great, so both they can trust you, so the readers can sense, whether or not you're credible, and they can go perhaps find things from the sources. Yeah, so if you're reading something that has a really cool reference and you want to go and look for it, if the author has not cited it, then you have no idea what to do. You want to make sure that doesn't happen to your readers. What have we missed from your lists of why citation is important?
Be a reader, view,
Any of them.
for the sources to give you credit.
Yeah, great. Give credit. Yeah, so they get credit for what they've done. Absolutely. Over here. We got them covered. How about my table over here? Any more ideas to add to our mix? Okay, let's see if you caught all the ones that I had initially brainstormed. Yeah, so credibility, no credit. Well, you mentioned it over here, but for your own kind of benefits, especially as a university student who is handing in assignments to be graded by your professors, this is how you guard against charges of plagiarism, right? And plagiarism, there's a little definition there for you from the MLA. Oh, I still says 7 on there. It's a typo from MLA 8. It should be. Apologies to that one. Anyway, we want to guard against charges of plagiarism, which is presenting another person's ideas, information, or expressions, or work as your own. So citation allows you to do that. Readers can follow up with sources they're interested in, and then, yeah, you said that one gives credit to sources for the work they've done. Great. So this gives us then a sense of why this is important, why we need to care about the stuff that we're going to be talking about here tonight. So hopefully you're all in agreement with me. I've convinced you, or you've convinced yourselves that we need to do our citing properly. So in order to streamline and standardize the style and formatting that different writers use to present their citations, there are several different scholarly organizations who have developed guidelines. MLA stands for the Modern Languages Association. So this is an organization that's been around since 1883, so for really quite a long time, and it has had some kind of style guide since the 1950s. And if you're in here, I'm guessing you're in some kind of class that focuses on language or literature, because those are the disciplines that tend to use MLA as its format, as their formatting guide. So I wanted to just give you a couple of the underlying principles that govern this citation style guide, so you have a sense of what we're working with. The general purpose statement that I have up there I think is a nice kind of summary, where the citation guidelines for MLA are meant to allow authors to guide their readers quickly and unobtrusively to the source of a quotation, a paraphrased idea, a piece of information, or another kind of borrowed material. I think that's another typo. Man, I need to edit these slides. Sorry. So the important words there is we want quick guidance for your readers. They shouldn't have to kind of sift through a whole bunch of stuff. They should be able to get the information quickly. And we want it to be unobtrusive. So we want it to be as sort of minimal as possible in terms of what's in the writing, so that we're not getting tripped up by, you know, a whole bunch of parenthetical references, a lot of extra information beyond what you're writing about. So that's what we're looking for here. Some of you may have heard this from professors that the new MLA citation guide, the 8th edition, is fairly new. If you are new to citing, then this doesn't really matter too much for you because this is all brand new. But if you learned, say, 2 years ago, a way of doing MLA citations, it has changed fairly substantially for your works cited page. So the in-text citations work basically the same way, but the way that you set up your works cited page is no longer, as I've got up on the slide there, centered on what the publication format is for the specific text. Instead, it sort of says, okay, we now live in a world where the internet is all over the place, new forms, new genres are coming up all the time. So they want a set of guidelines, they wanted to develop a set of rules that could basically apply to anything. So what they do is give us a list of components that are common to most different sources, and minimizes the number of kind of rules, but instead gives you guidelines to follow. And what this actually has done is, I have a copy of the MLA handbook up here afterwards, if you are very interested in that. But it is about 2/3 only the size of the previous edition. I think that's about right. It's quite thin compared to what the last one is. So the last one would have said, you know, if you're citing a book, if you're citing a magazine, if you're citing a newspaper article, if you're citing a website, there would be a separate set of rules for each. This one just has one that should apply to all of them. So it gives a little bit more, as I say at the bottom there, flexibility and adaptability. Ideally, they won't have to redo it every time something new comes up. Make sense? Any questions? Okay, let's get into the details then. So I'd like to start with in-text citation here. So the purpose of in-text citations are really there. This is the stuff that comes in the body of your writing, and the goal here is to direct your reader to the entry on your works cited list for the source. That's the number one most important thing that your in-text citation should do. The second thing that it needs to do is tell your reader where within a source the specific thing that you're talking about, the quotation, the paraphrased idea, where that appears. So that means we have two different components of an in-text citation. The first one, its sole duty is to direct your reader to the works cited entry. And that means it needs to be whatever the first thing is on the works cited page. Most usually that's the author's last name, but occasionally, so if you have some kind of source that doesn't have an author, it's anonymous, then that might be the first couple of words of the title. So somewhere in the body of your writing, that thing needs to appear, it's essential. And then if applicable, if you're working with some kind of text that has page numbers, you'll have a page number. This can also be slightly different. If it's a poem, then you often cite the line number. If it is a media that is time-based, like a song or a film, sometimes you would include the time markers of where it appears. But most frequently in the papers you're writing for your university classes, you're looking for page numbers there. Okay, so there's these two components we need to include, and the second of them is the easy one. The page number always appears in your parenthetical reference. That's your brackets, comes in brackets. The first part, the works cited keyword, often appears in brackets, or it can appear in the body of your sentence. And that just means you don't need to duplicate it. So if you have a sentence, and a lot of the examples I'll be drawing from tonight are from the book Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which I gave out to one of the tables to work with. You've got it over here. So, so if you have a sentence that says, in Between the World and Me, Ta-Nehisi Coates writes that quotation, and you have Ta-Nehisi Coates there in your sentence, you don't need to duplicate it in the parentheticals. So we got components, specific locations. These are the general guidelines, but I want to look at some specific examples here, so that you can see what they look like, and then you can practice these. So this is sort of a memoir that Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote sort of towards his son, and it's about growing up and living as an African-American man in the United States. So that's the theme of what's going on in the background for this book, so you have a good context for these quotations. But you can see here, and these examples are on your handout, so follow along with me, but make sure that you note the specific details I mentioned, because this is where we get into all the picky stuff. Okay, so these are, that I've got on the slide now, short quotations that are incorporated right into the author's sentence. So the two key components, I've bolded those so you can see them quickly for reference. You notice that the first example includes what's called an attributive tag, and that's where we have the author's name, Ta-Nehisi Coates writes. Since that attributive tag is in the sentence, we don't have his last name in the in-text parenthetical reference. The second sentence changes it a little bit, and the sentence does not have his name in it. Therefore, we need it in the parenthetical reference so that it's very clear that both of those components are present. So keep in mind here, as you look at the examples, the placement of things like punctuation. So the location of punctuation marks relative to both quotation marks and parentheticals is important. So the period comes after that parenthetical, and the quotation mark comes before it. Also note that when you have the author last name and the page number there, you don't need a comma between them. Remember, MLA are going for unobtrusive, the smallest amount of stuff possible within the body of your writing, so they don't have the commas there. So those are just some important small details to note. Any questions? Okay, so you may have heard of these before. If you have an MLA quotation that takes up more than 4 complete lines, then you format it as what is called a block quotation. So that's what we have here. And the important things to note about that one is that you often begin with a colon, and that especially applies if the quotation you have is a standalone sentence. So you see the block quotation there. You could read it on its own. It begins with a capital, ends with a period. It's a complete sentence or set of sentences. So we have just a colon leading to it. It is offset by a half inch, and there are no quotation marks. So basically in a block quote, you don't need the quotation marks because you have that indentation to signal to your reader, this is what I've borrowed. This is my quote. What do I have here? Why did I put that there?
No quotation.
No, yeah, that's it. I got ahead of myself. This is where I thought I was. So the punctuation works differently for block quotations. For block quotations, you finish the punctuation of the quotation, and then you get the parenthetical reference. And then I just added in here for another fun quotation fact, these ellipses here, the 3 dots. You can use ellipses if you are kind of skipping over a section of what's in the original text. You can't do it in a way that changes the meaning of the text, but occasionally there's kind of extraneous material that you don't really need in your own quotation to prove your point. So the 3-dot ellipses is what you can use to show that you've done that. I know that's a lot of kind of small details coming at you. Does anyone have questions about that or want a repetition of anything for clarity?
That final section, like that lower by 1 or 3, what was that space?
The 3 dots?
No, before you said that, by 1 or 3 or the.
Oh, what I was mentioning there, so just look at the punctuation. So the period comes before the parenthetical, because remember the previous slide, we had it coming afterwards. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, thanks, good one. Okay, so I just have one more block quotation here because I wanted to mention that you don't always need to have a colon. In this one, you can see that the block quotation actually is part of the sentence. And so I've got a comma there to kind of show that we're continuing the sentence. We're not breaking off and then moving into a new one. And then again, just like in the shorter version of the quotes, if you do not have that attributive tag where the author's last name is in the sentence, then it appears in that parenthetical reference. So we've got a couple examples there for you to have on hand of short quotations and a couple of the longer quotations. So just, I'm going to get you to try this out, but before I turn you loose on the sources you have, a few just additional notes here. Is that if you are paraphrasing something or summarizing instead of quoting, it works exactly the same way. I know this is a little bit different in APA, but in MLA, if you paraphrase another author's idea, you use an in-text citation exactly like you would if you were quoting. If you have, these are some kind of cases that may come up, and the reason why this book is not just 4 pages long, but is a little bit longer than that, is that there are a bunch of different kind of special cases. If you are citing from more than one author with the same last name, you add their first initial. If you have more than one text by the same author, like Ta-Nehisi Coates written a bunch of things, then you would have the first word of the title as well as the last name. Like it doesn't have an author, like if this Between the World and Me was anonymous, then it would just be the first word of the title. In MLA, if you have 2 authors, you write both of their names. But if you have more than 2 authors, you write et al., which means and others. And all is an abbreviation, so it always needs a period after it. So that's what you've got to remember if there are more than 2. And again, if you use APA, there you need to write additional names, but you only ever have to write 2 names in MLA in-text citations. And then there was just a few little examples of some of the things you might use in place of page numbers. Often if you're citing online sources, you use paragraph numbers. Time-based media, you use the time. Drama often uses scene, act, and line numbers. And then poetry, this one I always like to mention because I know a lot of you are in literature classes. A single slash signifies a line break, whereas a double slash signifies a stanza break. So one group has the Norton Anthology of American Literature. These lines come from that poem or from that text, and you can see the slashes, which show us that we've got breaks in lines for Whitman's poem there.
Dr. can you go back to that previous slide? I don't think I have an example for it. If there's 2 authors,
Just 2 authors?
just 2 authors,
Yeah, then you use both names.
and do you say and or comma between them, or?
You would put the, yeah, and, so if I was co-authoring with Coates, it would be Coates and Love. But if you put a comma between them, the comma sort of signals that it's a different thing. Like if you have two different things in one sentence, so just and is fine. Yeah. And I actually have an example of that on the works cited one. So the thing I write on the works cited slide that you'll see in a little bit for two authors works the same for in-text citations. Good question though. Any other questions? Okay, so now it's your turn. What I'd like you to do is take one of the sources that you have on your table, and you can work with a partner or a group of three if you've got lots of folks, or if there's too many people and someone has a computer, you can pull open your computer and find another source. That would work too. But I'd like you to write a sentence that somehow incorporates a quotation and use a correctly formatted in-text citation to cite that source. So I'll circulate around, but work on having one sentence there ready to show me. You actually, why don't you come over here and then we can go together. Yeah, together. That was a better idea. Collaborate on that. You've already got your. All right, how are we doing over here? Good. Where's our sentence beginning? Okay, I got one. You wanted to add something at the beginning to have an attributive tag, right? How would you add an attributive tag? Any questions? How are we doing over here? Question? As a heads up, we're going to take 30 more seconds here, and then we will move on and move ahead. But if there are other questions, and I know table 8 has a couple of them, how are we doing over table 6? I didn't get to check in with you folks. You're okay? Okay. 30 seconds, and then I'll be back. Yes. So this is a called an active group, which is the name of the journal. And this article has a title, author, and it will have a grade. Yeah, so this one, we actually celebrate MLA. We would write in the first part literature and problem. So there's the title, like that there. And so the thing to remember is right where like probably out. Regularly, that is exactly the right way because that's where I want to make sure you get enough where you're really managing. It doesn't have to be a separate line. It actually will only be a different line. So some in-house citation guides have to be standard and then this can just be on that line. It doesn't have to be a separate line. And it doesn't have to be specified to the other side. It's right there. And so remember, if it is a block quotation, there are all right, I just want to make sure that everybody gets to benefit from the good questions that have come up. So a few little tips to remember. These ones are important because if you don't follow them, you will really irritate your English teachers. First one is titles. If you have a title of a complete text that is a full book, like a novel or a play it goes in italics. If you have a title of a shorter text that is part of a larger whole, so an individual poem in a book of poems, an individual article in a larger volume or newspaper, an individual song on an album, those shorter titles go in quotation marks. So italics means it's a complete text, sort of like a whole book, the whole thing in and of itself. The shorter texts that are parts of larger wholes, those get quotation marks. That's just an important one to remember. And there was one other thing, what was it? Oh, it will come to me. Any final questions about in-text citations before we move forward? All right, we're making good time. We're halfway down. We're gonna not do that. Okay, so we're going to move on to the works cited page, which is, I know, the thing where we get all kinds of different questions as English professors about the details and how to choose which things to include. So I want to go through the general rules here, and then again, I'm going to give you a chance to work on creating your own MLA works cited entry. So the guidelines here of our works cited, and this is the page that comes at the end of your paper that includes all of the citational information, all of the sources that you've referenced, is to, here we've got it straight from the words of the MLA, identify the sources you borrow from and therefore cite in the body of your research project. So this is not a works consultant. If you read 27 things for your paper and only included references from 4 of them, you only get to include 4 things. So the works cited is what you have actually cited in your paper. There are some general formatting guidelines there to keep in mind. First is that they need to be alphabetically ordered by whatever the first word is in the entry, with the exception of things like the, articles, little words like that. So usually this is by your author last name or occasionally by the title. Second is your works cited page needs to use what's called hanging indentation. And this means that the first line of every entry is over on the far side of the page, and all the other lines are indented ½ inch. Makes it really easy as you're scanning down the page looking for a source to find what that first word is. And then here's my little title references here, but that's also important for your in-text citation if you need references to the titles of works. It's the same thing in the body of your paper as it is on the works cited. So keep those 3 things in mind when you're doing all your works cited entries. Okay, so there's 5 beautiful red stars on this slide because this is the most important slide of the evening, and you have this list on your handout. So this is the chart that has, it should be on the back side of the main handout. And what we have here are the core elements of every works cited entry. So before I mentioned that the new goals of this MLA 8 set of guidelines are to have one kind of comprehensive list that will work for any source, no matter what form. And basically what you do when you're trying to figure out what you'll include on your works cited is go down this list and include anything on this list that is relevant to your source. Very important note, you'll see, and the page numbers that I've listed up there are the page numbers in the MLA book if you have the book and want more details. But look at the punctuation marks that are included there after each entry. That is the punctuation you use on your works cited. So after the author, you get a period, full stop. After the title, period, full stop. Then you'll see a series of commas all the way down to the end where we get one more full stop. So that is new, that is different from the last version of MLA, and it's really important in terms of our little nitty-gritty details for citation. Okay, so this is what we're going to be working with as we go through our lists. What I'd like you to do is have that source that you wrote your quotation from with you, and as I go through this, your job is to fill in on the columns of that chart all of the information that would be relevant for that source, based on what your individual source is, okay? So the first one is pretty straightforward, our author. And remember, we want last name first because it's alphabetical by last name. So it's last name, comma, first name. So here's a little bit more info about what happens with 2 authors, 3 authors, and occasionally the author of the first entry is going to be someone other than the initial author, like if it's something in translation that doesn't have an initial or is an anonymous author. And if that's the case, then you need to write out what that person's role is. I don't know that there are any sources like that out there in circulation tonight, but make sure you have the author's last name, comma, first name. Yes.
So, author should have to be full name.
Should you use the full name for the first name? In MLA, yes, that is standard. I know in APA it's just initials. So MLA does usually include full names. If you don't have that information though, then just use the initials. So use what you have, but MLA typically does include the full name.
And if there's more than one author, are they doing et al. Again or writing each one?
So you can see there with two authors, we've got last name, first name, Coates, comma, Ta-Nehisi, and Heather Love for my wonderful dream co-authored article with Ta-Nehisi Coates. If we've got more than two, then we just have the first person, whoever's first listed on the comma et al. Any questions? Everyone's with us? Does everyone have an author written down on your chart? Yes? I'm going with yes. We're moving ahead. Okay, step 2 is also fairly straightforward, although keep in mind some texts have subtitles as well as main titles. Those can all go in here. Again, if it is a complete full volume, full item, it is in italics. If it is a smaller part of a larger whole, for example, Ta-Nehisi Coates' article in The Atlantic, The Case for Reparations, that's within a larger form, so it's in italics, or in, sorry, quotation marks there. If you have, this is kind of a just random fact, if you're citing something that is a short or kind of untitled message, like a tweet, then the entire text of it actually can be your title. I know I have at least one tweet floating around at the tables. But if you're doing sort of a more of a media analysis piece and you have something like that, then that can just be your full title. So get your title written down there. Does anyone have questions about what would count as the title for the text you're working with?
What if you're doing a series?
A series like what?
A series.
Like TV shows or novels? So it kind of depends on what's relevant to your paper. If you're doing a series of, say, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and you're only writing about one episode, your title could be the episode. If you're doing sort of something that covers, like that's talking about Buffy as a whole, then you could have that as your title, but whatever is the most specific and relevant thing for you, you would include here. I think that you folks here at table 3, you have the Wordsworth Prelude, right? So Wordsworth's Prelude has multiple books, and that's one where you could just cite the prelude, the whole thing, in your works cited, or you could cite the specific text if you're only using book 2. So you have some flexibility there. Your reader needs to know what it is and where they can go and find it by the end of the time, or by the time they get to the end of your list, though. Good questions. Questions?
Yeah, but it's from the previous slide. So if you have 2 authors, then the first author's name starts with last name, comma, first name, and then the next author is first name and then last name.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because last name, first name is just so we have an easily scannable list, so we can see what that first alphabetical part is. Yeah. Okay, so this is, oh yes, sorry.
So if there are more than 3 authors,
Uh-huh.
yeah, so it would be like last name, first name, and et al.
Correct. Yeah. I know all the little details. So this third step is the one that sounds the most confusing, but is actually not too bad, I promise. They've introduced this term called a container, and basically what it means, as they've explained here, is that when the source that you're documenting forms a part of the larger whole, the larger whole is thought of as a container that holds your source. So if you're writing about a novel, the novel title is the work at a whole, there's no container. You don't even have to have this. If you're working with a novel, Crying of Lot 49, Neuromancer, this one is blank. If you're working with a part of a larger whole, though, an essay within an edited collection, an article within a magazine, a poem within a larger book, a poem within an anthology, the larger object is your container. So make sure you get your container here. And remember, this is where we start having commas, because all the information that's coming after this will be information about that container. So we've got some examples there, The Atlantic, Twitter. I know I've got a Norton Anthology of American Literature. What other containers do I have out here? Table 1 over in the corner. What's the title of your container? What's the container? So you've got a short story in a book of short stories, right? So if you're writing about one short story, then that's the title in quotation marks, and then the whole book, Friendship, Hateship, Loveship, Courtship, Marriage, right? That would be your container, okay? Yes?
Would your container be italicized?
Yes, so the container is a larger whole, so absolutely, it's going to be italicized. Other questions? What do we have as a container over here? Handbook of Food Research, yep, that's that one.
For this one, the container should be new.
You don't have one. The title, that's it. So that one is a nice, easy one. Novels, full text, those are the best. Then you don't even have to worry about this stuff. Any questions about the container? Okay, so now we're going to get into all the information that pertains to this container. Sorry. First is any other contributors who have been part of making it. So those can be editors, translators, what other things can go in this? Editor, translator. If it is a film director, so anyone that needs to have credit for the source goes there. And you used to be able to do abbreviations here, but in the new MLA, since this is quite flexible and everything needs to be kind of covered, you write that out in full. So you would write for our Norton Anthology, edited by, and then the names of the editors. Or translated by, name of the translators. Yes?
So like, in this book, I'm having like editor, managing editors, advisory board, editorial committee.
So let's see, which is that one? So an academic journal, you actually don't require it for an academic journal. You can just have the container title there, because those are people that change out each time, and it's such a long list that that's sort of like a body of people together who work on it collaboratively, and they do a whole bunch of different things. So actually a journal, for an academic journal, then you don't need the editor for that one. Good question though. I know there's all these little things that come up. Any other question about what you might include for those? Yes. If there's a couple of them, yeah. And that one has who? Nina Baim and someone else? Yeah, so put the two names down there. And then after that, often you're working with texts that come from sort of periodical editions of things. So if it's an academic journal, so here we don't need all the editors, but we do need to know what volume, what number it is. So we can have different editions. Your Norton Anthology has an edition. If you have a magazine, it usually will have a volume and a number, and you get that information here in steps 5 and 6. So take a look and see what kind of other information about the number would be. And if you are one of the people who luckily drew one of the texts that doesn't have any of this, take a look at the other sources at your table to see what they might include. Because this is important stuff to know about. I'm going to just do a quick circulation and see where we're at, make sure we've got all the questions answered for these 3 steps, because they're a little bit finicky. So I will be right back for those of you online, but I'll be circulating around. So what do we have? And so you can actually find it out in abbreviations. So I used to only for like you should include any other questions? Straightforward one. So this is what you have in here. This is actually Questions? I know you guys have questions. So this is the thing, right? You have a little bit of that it was printed, so that's what in this case, you can also explore different one that you have.
Yeah.
I did a colon, because the subtitle usually comes with a colon. And you can see that you have a much longer title. So you have a few options that you can put there. Again, reader, library, All right, I'm going to move us forward since we're down to 10 minutes left. We're on to step 7 of our core information here, unless there are any other questions about these 3 steps. No? Okay. So in previous versions of MLA, you needed to include the city where the publisher was located. That is no longer required, but you do need to have the publisher's name. So the organization primarily responsible for producing the source or making it available. If you have a book, it's usually listed in that front cover area. If it is, or if it's a university text, which often you're citing in academic essays, they have a handy abbreviation of UP because it's used so frequently. If it is a film or television text, then a network. If it's a website, then often at the bottom of the page, there'll be some kind of copyright notice with publisher information. You don't need to duplicate information, so something like the New York Times is the title of your container. It's also the publisher. You don't need to have it twice. But any information about who the publisher is for your text should go in there. So you can see at the bottom there's a note on, kind of like with the editors in periodicals, you don't need to necessarily include these if it's the same as the publisher. Looks like I do something at the bottom. So does everyone have a publisher down? Thumbs up. You guys good at the fact table there? Great. So the publication date here, again, there's a little bit of flexibility. Some things you only know a year, some things you know a month, some things you know the day of the month. Put whatever is relevant. I would say put whatever you have, get as much information in as you can, but at least the year if it's there, and then otherwise get as specific as you'd like. Did you have a question there, sir?
Yeah. So it says like published quarterly in January, April, September, and November. Although there is mention like 2016, the copyright.
So that is the Modernism Modernity, right?
Yeah.
So a little hint about that journal. If you go to the first page of the article that you're citing, it usually has all of the information. Let me just come check. They want you to read all the information. So a little tip when you're citing sources that are academic journals, usually they publish them in such a way that if you only photocopied or printed off the article you're reading, all the information you need is there. So look at the first page and see what's in there. So on the literature compass one, it's all at the very top. That's everything you need. Do you have an academic article over there? No. Yeah, in that one, in the PMLA, on each beginning page, it should all be there. Because often you'll go and look these up on the library database and just print off one article, so it's all included there. And then, yeah, if multiple dates are associated with your source, and this brings me back to the Buffy episodes, TV episodes air on a certain date, then they come out as box sets on a different date. So pick the one that's most relevant to you. If your paper is about sort of viewing reception of Buffy the Vampire Slayer as it was coming out, you would want that date. But if you're looking sort of at the set, then maybe you want the box set date. So it's up to you here to use the thing that's most relevant to your own writing. Sound good? Everyone's got a date of some sort written down? All right. So the last step that goes into your information about your container, this is a little confusing. It's the location within the source. This is not a geographic location. It's sort of a confusing name, I know, but you want the location of your text within its container. So if it is an article or a poem, it's the page range within the larger whole. If it is a website, it is the URL. And yes, this is, I know in the 7th edition of MLA, you didn't have to include URLs, but they would like URLs again. That being said, there are websites that have what's called a DOI, a digital object identifier. I know we've got one of those over with the electronic journal source. If there's an option between a www dot blah, 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 and a DOI, digital object identifier, or a stable link, use the DOI. That's something that's not going to change. It's assigned to that text forever. Web links can change. So use whatever is the most permanent. And then especially if you're using something that might change, like the website, you want to include your access date afterwards as sort of like a tag, because that signals to your reader, when I first put together these slides on the 29th of August, 2016, this is where that was. So if somebody's Twitter account gets deleted and everything is gone forever, then you have a record of when it was there. So that's kind of, you know, covering your butt in case things change on the World Wide Web as they do on a regular basis. So you'll see on the side there's those two little boxes. The bottom one is about page number ranges. I think partially because this is meant to be a set of guidelines that work for everything. MLA now asks you to include PP for page numbers and then the range. You didn't used to need that, but now you need that again. So when you're writing the page numbers, make sure you include that. And then just as a kind of exercise in why we have these formatting guidelines, if you look at the list of sources I've included on this page, it's really hard to scan down there and see where they begin and where they end. And that's because there's no hanging indentation. I was too annoyed trying to figure out how to do it on PowerPoint. So you, on your sample works cited that you'll have to take home, have an example of hanging indentation. This shows you the contrast of why we ask you to do that. Without it, it's really hard to read. Okay, so the last thing I'll just mention here about a few kind of things to have in mind as you're completing your works cited list is, let me just make sure I'm not forgetting. Yes. You are working with a text that was originally published, say like Frankenstein back in 1818, but you're working with an edition that was created last year. You have the option of including the original date of publication as well as a separate component, probably after the title. In really old text, sometimes like before 1900, it can be useful to include the city of publication. If there are multiple volumes, you could include a reference to the total number of volumes. If it's a weird type of source that doesn't come up very often, you can also include sort of a marker of what it is so your reader knows. And then I mentioned date of access. If you think that the source you're citing might not be around forever, include that date of access. Okay, so important thing to note, container business and all the parts of it. Sometimes, kind of like, you know, a Russian doll with all the different dolls within each other, there are more than one container. And this, I would say in your cases, is most going to come up if you're searching a library database. You found an article that's published in Modernism Modernity, but you looked for it through Project Muse, which is a search engine or a database. You'll see in the bottom example there, this is an article in Modern Fiction Studies. If I searched for it through Project Muse, I would include Project Muse as a separate container. So that's just a good thing to have in mind, that occasionally you need to go a little bit further there. And that often happens if you use the library search engines. So you should have your works cited entry information all gathered. And I believe you also all have with you a sample works cited page. So what I'd like you to do before you go is go and find your source on that works cited page. Most of the ones that I've handed out should be on there. And see if you have written down all the necessary components. See if you got everything that you would have to have required on there. And that sample works cited is for you to take home with you. It has as many different types of sources as my colleagues think of. So hopefully whatever you come up with that you need to cite, there'll be some model on this page that you can use. But for now, make sure that what you wrote down matches up for what you should have had according to that sample. And if not, if it doesn't look the same and you're confused, flag me down. I'm happy to stick around and answer any final questions about that before you head out for the evening.
Baldwin's not on.
Pardon me? Is Baldwin not on there? I must have added that in, because there's so many people here. I'm not used to there being all these people here. If you come up with more questions as you're working through this on your homework assignments, a really good website that I'm sure your instructors have already pointed you to is the Purdue Online Writing Lab, the OWL. There's a link to it there. If you're in English 101 or 210 and you have Connect 3.0, it has quite a good citation guide for MLA. You can also go and purchase your own copy of the MLA handbook or go over to the Writing Center in the library. They've got copies there. So there's lots of resources around to help you out and get all these nitty-gritty details. But I hope that you now have a sense of what it is you need to look for, what it is you need to be thinking about. And I know that there was a question about general formatting for a paper in MLA style. And if you go to that Purdue OWL website, there is a tab that gives you the general formatting for a paper as a whole. So it tells you about all the things like how large your margins should be, what information needs to be in the running header with your page number and last name, what information needs to be at the beginning of the page, all that stuff. So all of the details for actually formatting the paper itself are there as well. And that's all I have to say. So thanks for coming out, everyone. And are there any final remarks from the Writing Center folks?
Yes, make sure on your comment cards that you're including your student ID number if you want paw points.
Oh yes, get your paw points. Please send in the comment cards, and I hope that you have a good evening. Thanks.
Yes, return your comment cards either to Rye, who distributed them, or to me. Thank you. Thank you for being here, and don't forget about APA workshop next week.
What do we do with these?
I'll take that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was very awesome. So, most social science professionals do. So, American psychology. All right. Thank you very much. Psychology for sure. Thanks. A lot of healthcare fields. Thanks.
I still have her picture.
No, no.
I was just taking pictures while you guys were working.
Oh,
That's what
yeah, I know that.
Oh, I thought you meant like individual picture. I'm like, okay.
Thank you.
I feel one now. I said, here's two.
Thank you. I'll take that.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
And, I'll take that.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So location isn't a geographical location. It's like the place within if it's aligned, it's the website. So because you're public here, I want to go to Any other questions? Thank you. So. Yours doesn't have one, because it's not enough. So if I were to be writing about this essay, this is the title of the essay.
Yeah, if you can get it.
This book. So the thing that contains your shorter. So this would be the title. So and then if you were talking about a song, the song is the name of the title, and the album is. So it's the larger whole, the larger thing that you're connected. Does that make more sense, sort of? Yeah. So, yeah. So the ISBN is your book. It's a number, like a long number that is assigned to a specific book. Yes, but you don't usually necessarily need that one here because you've got all the information for it. Oh, so, and this is also something kind of moving around. The DOI is a digital object identifier. Track articles from an online magazine, and those ones are important to include because they're stable, they're fixed, they're not going to change. They're like the thing that's on the web, but it's fairly stable, and that's why they're good to include. Because if you're looking for DOI, your question would be, should I include the URL, the www dot blah blah blah, or should I include DOI? And if there is a DOI, it's more stable than
That I saw, I saw a lot of DIY.
I don't know. I was
most journals these days have DOI. Like it's pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
DIY is 10.
Yeah, and usually, let me see if I can find my example here. On most academic articles, all the information you need will be on the page. So this one has it right here, this long string, that's the DOI.
Yeah, where I get it.
At where?
It's your parcel file. I see how I am maybe four.
Okay. And so,
Also have
yeah, it's the same type of pattern. Not everything has it. Like, I mean, if you look at the, like, the reference on the journal page, it's there. It's going to be in the same place where the rest of the information is. So they'll include it there as well. Oh, you're welcome. How it helps. I know there's a lot of.
another thing is
To get one, to make one?
which is free. You or you replace.
I'm not sure if I exactly understand, like a free source to get a DOI?
Yeah, I used to do it like I used to download website. They provide it. Nowadays, but it's totally other.
No, I'm not sure. Because the DOI is something created by the publisher. So it's either created by the publisher or it's not. And not, they don't all do it.
I have a question for you online. You can just get it on my computer.
Oh, no.
Or you can just talk into this. Yeah. There we go.
I want to do it more.
You can just
Twist
talk,
in
you don't
here?
have to type, yeah. This is, he shared his entry, and I told him he would respond. Just wanted to get your
Okay.
feedback.
Gotcha. Oh, although I think it might have said that he just left the conversation.
Did he? Oh, yeah.
Are you there?
Oh, bummer.
Oh,
I think there's a question.
sorry, I missed you, Andrew.
But is the recording still going?
Yes.
Okay, so
Okay.
you could respond to him and he may check the recording.
So this is for Andrew. You were looking at the Shrek example, and the in-text citation looks really good. You've got the title Shrek, A True Love Story in quotation marks. If that is the name of an article about Shrek, that would be correct. But if that is actually the title of the movie, then that is a source that is a complete full source of itself. So it goes in italics as opposed to quotation marks. But other than that, you probably, since it's a film, you probably want to include the director. So you would write directed by, and then the director's name. That would probably be important. But other than that, let's see. Malibu Hills is the location, and you no longer have the location included in MLA. So you just, DreamWorks on its own is fine, and the date looks good like that. Yeah. Keep in mind on other sources, if you have information about your container or your title, they get commas between them. So DreamWorks would then be followed by a comma before the date. So there's just a little bit. So you probably want it to look. I'll type up Sternberg Pete, and then you'd want italics. I think this would be correct. So Shrek, A True Love Story is in italics. I put those lines because it won't let me do that. I assume that Pete Sternberg is the director, and since it's not the usual type of author, I'd put director. DreamWorks, 2004. Hope that helps.
When do you recommend putting the access date, the date that you accessed it, just if it's a website that